Hello, my fellow miniature enthusiasts. I'm Natasha with Viva Design Miniatures, and I make miniatures and dollhouse furniture with a modern twist. Today kicks off a brand new mini-series where I take this store-bought Hutch and give it not one, not two, but 5 totally different makeovers, all using simple supplies and absolutely zero fancy tools. We're talking realistic finishes, modern styles, and creative ways to match your dollhouse aesthetic without breaking the bank. In this first episode, we're going full farmhouse with creamy white and natural distressed wood tones. I'll walk you through each step, tell you all the materials and supplies I used, and give you tips to make your piece one of a kind. All of the supplies and tools I'll be using will be linked down below, so grab your materials and let's get started.
First, you're going to need an unfinished Hutch, and I picked this one up from Hobby Lobby for $4.49, but you can easily find something similar on Amazon if Hobby Lobby is not an option for you. You can use any craft paint that you have on hand. I'm using this Folk Art multi-surface in the color Cottage White. Next, you'll need a regular wood stain. I'm using the Minwax brand, and I ended up switching to Early American because this weathered oak was a touch too light. You're also going to need some fine grit sandpaper, a sponge brush to apply your stain, a regular paintbrush for your paint, an X-Acto knife with a very sharp blade, preferably a fresh one, and some craft glue. My brand of choice is the Beacon 3-in-1. And finally, you need 4 drawer pulls and 2 cabinet door pulls. The first step is to dump all the drawers out, and then we're going to very carefully use our X-Acto knife to cut the little wooden knobs off of the front of the drawers. This is a semi-soft wood, so it's relatively easy to cut it off. Just take your time and be very careful because you don't want to cut yourself. You also need to remove the 2 knobs from the doors, and if you're lucky, they will pop off really easy with a pair of pliers. If not, you will have to cut those off as well. It just depends on how much glue they used when it was manufactured. Next, you're going to sand the entire piece, and we're going to really focus on the front of these drawers where we remove the knobs because we want that surface to be completely smooth and flat. For the rest of the piece, you're just going to lightly sand everything so that you have a really smooth finish to start with. Now, since we're staining this piece, we do need to be really careful and check for any glue that has seeped out from underneath the shelves or any of the other areas where the 2 pieces connect together. Anywhere where there's glue is not going to absorb the stain, so just make sure that you sand that area really smooth. Brush away any dust and then grab your can of stain and make sure you stir it thoroughly, especially if it hasn't been used in a while. Take your sponge brush and lightly dip it into the stain. You do not want your sponge brush to be absolutely sopping wet or dripping stain. You only need a little bit. A little bit goes a long way here. You don't have to stain the inside of the drawers. That's up to you if you want to, but make sure that you get all of the edges, including the top edges. Once you've finished staining all of the drawers, you can move on to staining the entire hutch. We do want to make sure that every single surface, all of the wood is completely stained, even though we're going to be covering it with paint. This base layer of stain is what is going to show through once we start distressing the furniture after we've painted. Don't forget to stain the legs, the underside of the cabinet, and inside the doors, but you don't have to stain the shelves inside of the doors unless you want to. The longer you let the stain sit, the deeper and richer the color will be, so after you've let it set for as long as you'd like to, you can start wiping away the excess stain with a paper towel. Now you can set the hutch aside until it's totally dry and not tacky to the touch. Once it's completely dry, you can move on to painting, but just make sure that it actually is completely dry, because if you start painting this piece while the stain is still wet, it's going to bleed right into your paint and it's not going to be white anymore. I've been painting furniture for over a decade, and the same rules apply to painting miniatures. Finish your section with long light strokes, work quickly, and don't overdo it with the brushing. Smooth it out and move on. Fair warning, this is going to look really bad before it looks good because you're painting over a really dark color with a really light shade, so the first coat is going to be extremely streaky, but don't panic. We're gonna let it dry and we're gonna add several more coats until it's fully covered. Once I start painting, I'm kind of mapping out which section I'm going to do next because I really want to avoid touching the wet paint. I don't want to leave any fingerprints or any marks in the paint because it'll be really hard to smooth that out in the next step, and I'll have to sand it down first. This piece is relatively easy to paint, and it's easy to access all of the nooks and crannies. The only area that you might have trouble with is the very top underneath the trim, but you can access it if you really try hard. But also, if you can't get it, don't worry about it because no one's going to be able to see it once you have it in place. The most important thing about painting this backing is you want to make sure that you have really smooth strokes because it will be super super visible if they're streaky or if you have short strokes or it's not completely covered. If you're using acrylic paint like I am, it's going to dry really fast, so you only have to set it aside for a couple of minutes before you can move on to painting it the second coat. My hutch was really smooth after the first coat, so I did not have to go back over it with sandpaper, but if you have any blemishes or paint runs, you might want to go back over it and make sure you get rid of all of the dust before you move on to painting it the second coat. I ended up having to give this piece of furniture 3 full coats and a 4th coat on some sections to get full coverage. That's really just going to depend on the type of paint you use, but just make sure that you're letting it fully dry in between coats. If you're like me and you also painted your doors shut, you can just take your X-Acto knife and carefully run around the edges of it, and it will release the paint and you can easily open your door without peeling the paint. We're finally ready for the fun part. It's time to start distressing this piece of furniture, and this is where you can really go wild and decide how much or how little you want to distress. I want to have heavier distressing on the bottom side of this hutch, so I'm going in with a lot of deep cuts and running my X-Acto knife on all of the edges to make sure I get maximum distressing. Take your time with this step because you don't want to cut yourself. You want to be extra careful when you're using this X-Acto knife, but you just really want to apply light pressure and go around all of the edges and the doors until you get the look that you're going for. I suggest starting light with the distressing because you can always add more, but it's really hard to fix it if you go too far with the distressing. On the raised panels on the doors, I'm just going to run my X-Acto knife very lightly around all of the raised edges so that it gives it a little bit of distressed look, and then I'm also going to take a couple of chunks out of the center of the door. On the top side of the hutch, I am going in with a lighter touch and a lot less distressing because I don't want it to be too distracting from all of the accessories that I add to the shelves. The best part about this process is you really can't mess it up. It doesn't matter if you cut in the wrong place or if you take too much off because it's natural distressing, so it's going to look really good no matter how much you do or how little you do. I personally don't want to add any distressing to the back panel. I want it to stay bright white, so I'm just going to be really careful and go around all of the edges of the decorative detailing without touching that back panel. If you've decided that you took off too much of the paint and you want to go back and fix it, you're going to have to sand it first. If you try to paint right over top of it, it's going to look like a big glob of paint because you've got 3 layers of paint on the edges and then no paint on the inside, and then you're adding 3 more layers of paint on top of it. Once you're happy with the amount of distressing on your piece, you're going to take your same piece of sandpaper and then really concentrate on the corners because that's going to give it that worn, rustic look. You can also use the sandpaper to go over all of your distressing, especially if you have any areas that are raised because of the missing paint, and that's just going to help smooth it out. And then I also really like to use it on the feet. I love the way that it looks when it's on a rounded edge. Now that all the distressing's done, we're going to add all of our drawers back in, and then we're going to use some glue to add our new handles. I'm using these pre-made cup pools from Amazon in oil rubbed bronze. I think these pools just scream farmhouse, and they are the perfect accent to this hutch. I use this Beacon 3-in-1 craft glue for almost every single project that I work on. I love it so much. It dries really fast, but also gives you just enough time to move things around if they're not quite in the right place. These drawers are really small, so I didn't really need to measure. I just eyeballed it, but you can easily measure the center if you're not great at judging the distance. And finally, I used the pre-existing holes to add my doorknobs. Now your little farmhouse hutch is ready to be decorated and styled with any accessories that you'd like to add. I had most of my supplies on hand, so I only spent a couple of dollars to transform this hutch from plain and boring to bold and beautiful. But even if you have to buy all of the materials, it's not going to cost you as much as it would cost to buy this completely custom piece from another retailer. Let me know in the comments if you're going to make your own farmhouse hutch, and if you enjoyed this tutorial, please like this video and subscribe to my channel for more dollhouse and miniature content. The next 4 episodes of this Basic to Beautiful series are going to be amazing, and you're not going to want to miss it.